If reassurance worked for OCD, nobody would have it anymore. And you certainly wouldn't have clicked on this video. So by the end of this video, you will understand why relief strengthens OCD, what the brain is actually learning, and why this cycle has nothing to do with logic or willpower. So hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a therapist in Austin, Texas. I specialize in OCD, as well as sleep, chronic pain, PTSD, and something called maladaptive overcontrol. I make educational content related to each of these specialties. And so I'll say real quick that this content is for educational purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health treatment. Please always consult with a qualified mental health professional. And stick with me till the end, because I'll show you how understanding your OCD as a learning loop removes the shame, and how increasing your tolerance for uncertainty is really what it's all about. So I have a video, I'll link a video up here where I describe OCD in a lot more depth, but I will briefly define it here just in case this is the first video that you're watching. So OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's characterized by both obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions tend to be thoughts. Sometimes they're images, sometimes they're behavioral urges, but most of the time they're thoughts. They tend to be kind of like what if thoughts. What if I did this? What if this happened? What if that happened? And the what if tends to be something that's can be pretty out there or pretty devastating. So OCD is not typically thoughts like, what if I don't pass this test? Or what if I bomb this job interview? It's stuff like, what if I hurt my baby? What if I throw my baby out a 7-story window? What if I stab my loved ones? What if I run over this pedestrian with my car? What if I start screaming like obscenities in this work meeting? It's stuff like that. It's stuff that just, it's a little out there. It's stuff that's pretty inconsistent with who you are. Kind of by definition, obsessions tend to be just out of sync with the person that's having them. Like they're not aligned with your values, nothing like that. And they're always distressing. And so because you're having these distressing thoughts, you then feel compelled to do something to feel better or at least feel less bad. So that's the compulsion side of things. And a compulsion is anything you do to try to bring down the distress that comes from the obsession. So I want to talk about relief and learning. So a common OCD compulsion is asking for reassurance. And reassurance gives you a little bit of relief. You get a little bit of this like, oh, okay. So you ask, I don't know, maybe you're afraid that you're going to start screaming expletives in a meeting. And so you ask somebody for reassurance that I would never do that, right? And they're like, well, of course you would never do that. You have great self-control. You're very restrained. You would never do something like that. Okay. I feel reassured. But that relief never lasts. The doubt always creeps back in, because here's the thing. You could start screaming expletives, or even really really dark thoughts like stabbing a family member, throwing your baby out the window, stuff like that. You could. It's possible. Doesn't mean you will, doesn't mean you want to, but it's always possible for you to do that behavior. So some doubt always creeps back in. Okay, but what if they were wrong? What if they were lying to me? What if I didn't ask the question in the right way? What if maybe I wouldn't do it up until now, but then something changed? There's always some doubt. The doubt always creeps back in. And I kind of liken this to, if you've ever worked in retail, you've had the experience of a customer asking you if the store has a particular item, and either the store doesn't carry it or it's out of stock. And so you say, we don't have that. And so then they go find another employee and ask them the same question. And it's like, they keep asking people, I don't know, somehow thinking that they're going to get a different answer, or just because they don't like the answer. So with every instance of reassurance, giving you that relief, however short-lived, your brain actually learns a few things that are keeping this OCD cycle in place. So one thing your brain is learning is that uncertainty is in fact dangerous and it must be avoided at all costs. So every time there is uncertainty and your brain is like, uh-oh, uncertainty is dangerous, we can't have it, this is bad, you seek certainty through reassurance, or maybe through checking. There's other ways this can show up, but this video is really kind of focused on reassurance. So you seek certainty because uncertainty is dangerous. It feels dangerous. The other thing your brain learns, however erroneously, is that reassurance is what kept that bad thing from happening in the first place. So you know how people are like, I have to wear my lucky t-shirt or my team won't win? So what probably happened is they were wearing whatever shirt they happened to be wearing that day and their team won. So then they concluded that their team must have won because they were wearing that particular t-shirt. So now they wear it every game. And this, I'm of course not saying that sports fans all have OCD. That's of course not what I'm saying, but that is a ritual. That is a ritual. And I would argue that humans are really kind of ritual. I mean, we want control, we want certainty. Humans are kind of ritual driven creatures. People have lots of rituals around sporting events. I also think about you might see rituals around gambling. So the thing about like blowing on the dice before you roll them, that's a ritual. You're trying to, if you do it, especially if you do it every time and you feel like you have to do it and you're doing it to try to get some kind of an outcome. So seeking reassurance, that's a ritual. You seek reassurance. So let's say you wear your shirt and the team wins. So then you wear it again and the team wins again. Every time you do that, it gets reinforced. You blow on the dice and you get a favorable rolling, I guess, or it goes the way you want it to go. Now you're going to do that every time. Or you seek reassurance and then the bad thing doesn't happen. So you conclude, oh, must have been because I sought reassurance. So I'm just going to give a couple of quick examples of just how I think humans in general are ritual, whether you have OCD or not. Humans do rituals. We do rituals. So I started my career, one of the first places I worked as a therapist was in an emergency room. And I actually learned the hard way that you should never say words like slow, quiet, dead, anything like that. Don't ever say that, or people are going to freak out. So somebody was asking me how the night was going, and I said it's been slow, which was true. It had been slow. And this person got kind of freaked out and said, don't ever say that. Do not ever say it's slow, because as soon as you say it's slow, we're going to get slammed. And that's a thing. And so he said what I needed to say it's been a nice day. Say that. Don't say it's been slow. There's this fear that if you put slow out into the world, it's going to somehow make, I don't know, huge numbers of people have heart attacks and strokes and falls and psychotic breaks. And I mean, it's completely irrational when you break it down. But a lot of people that work in the emergency department follow that ritual where you don't say quiet or slow or anything like that. Another thing humans do is we look for patterns, even if those patterns aren't there. So I'll give the example of there's this belief just out there in the world that the full moon makes people crazy. And that, you see that in Hollywood movies. You see like just the word lunacy, which basically means craziness, like lunar lunacy. That word is related to the word for moon, but we say it's lunacy to say it's crazy. So I remember hearing from, again, people, it's funny, maybe ER staff are really ritual driven. I don't know, maybe there is something there. But people would always say, oh, watch out for the full moon. Stuff gets crazy on the full moon. So I actually tracked it. I actually paid attention. I was like, okay, every night that we have an especially busy night or something weird happens or just it's a crazy night, I'm going to check the moon phase. There was no pattern. At least not just for the period of time, which granted wasn't that long, but there was no pattern. Like, yes, there were some nights where stuff was crazy and it did happen to be a full moon, but that was I think it was pure coincidence. There was just as many crazy nights the night of a new moon as there was full moon. There was crazy stuff going on every phase of the moon. I think it just so happens that I think people just wanted to know. I think people wanted to know going into their shift, is it going to be busy? Is it going to be slow? And so let's do what we can to exert control, even though none of this stuff actually gives us control. So that brings me to my next point, which is OCD as a learned behavior. It is a learned behavior. It's not a logic problem. It's not about insight. It's not about intelligence. And that's actually why reassurance doesn't work. If it was just a logic problem, we could solve it with reassurance. We could pick apart the logic, and then people would feel better, and that would be the end of it. So the thing is, most people with OCD know that it's not rational. But just like the sports fan with the lucky t-shirt, it feels like a way to influence something that you don't actually have any control over. Because the alternative is that you have no control, and that's actually pretty scary. And so a lot of us would rather do some kind of a ritual so that we feel like we're in control, because sometimes that feels better than having to acknowledge, oh my God, I have no control. I could do everything right, and this could still get screwed up. That's a horrifying thought. And then especially when we're talking about the kind of stuff people worry about in OCD, a lot of the time is stuff that's life or death, or stuff about like people getting hurt. It's the stuff that people with OCD worry about is stuff that would be really devastating if it were to come to pass. So OCD is really about just what gets reinforced. And compulsions, whether it's reassurance, checking, mental reviewing, compulsions get reinforced when you feel less bad and or when the bad thing doesn't happen. So again, if every time you wear your lucky t-shirt, your team wins, that gets reinforced. If every time you seek reassurance, you feel a little bit better and the bad thing doesn't happen, that gets reinforced. And that's really how humans learn. So I'm going to back up from this a little bit, and I'm just going to get into talking about, when I say reinforced, what exactly does that mean? So in the world of psychology, there's an area of psychology known as behaviorism. And in behaviorism, the belief is that human behavior is shaped by reinforcements and punishments. And those reinforcements and punishments can be positive or negative. This doesn't mean good or bad. So a reinforcement is anything that encourages a behavior to continue. A positive reinforcement is being given something that encourages you to continue doing whatever it was you were doing. A negative reinforcement is taking something away that encouraged you to continue doing whatever you were doing. So a positive reinforcement, I'm going to use the example of drug use. Substance use tends to be positively reinforcing. You do the drug, you get high. You feel euphoric, you feel good. That's positive reinforcement. So then you're like, oh, that felt good. I'm going to do that again to try to get that same good feeling. That's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, I actually think cigarette smoking is a good example of negative reinforcement. Because I have never been a smoker, but I had somebody tell me once that kind of how it works is you just get this feeling in your chest like you need a cigarette, and then you smoke a cigarette and the feeling goes away. And that's negative reinforcement. You're getting that feeling, that pressure, that you don't like. And when you smoke the cigarette, that feeling goes away. So that's negative because it's taking something away. And it's reinforcing because it gets you like, oh, okay, the next time I get that feeling in my chest, I'm going to smoke another cigarette. Okay, cool. That's that. So that's positive and negative reinforcement. Punishment is anything that discourages a behavior to continue. So like a positive punishment, like a spanking, I think is an example of a positive punishment. Most people are using like spanking with their kids because they're they don't want their kid to do that thing again. And with a spanking, you're giving something. That's a positive punishment. And then a negative punishment is like being grounded, having privileges taken away. A fine would be an example of a negative punishment. Hopefully, you broke the law, you did something that we as a society don't want people doing. So we're going to take money away from you. And hopefully that gets you to be like, okay, I'm not going to do that again in the future because I didn't like having money taken away from me. So that's reinforcement, punishment, and then positive and negative. So now every time people misuse the phrase negative reinforcement a lot. So now every time you hear somebody do that, now you can be that super annoying person that corrects them. Actually, don't do that. I would not recommend. But now that you know that, it's gonna drive you crazy when people use it wrong. But anyway, that's that. So every time your anxiety drops because of reassurance or checking or mental review. That's negative reinforcement. OCD compulsions, that's negative reinforcement. They really don't make people feel good. They make people feel less bad. They take the distress away. And so then you're like, okay, cool. I'm going to do that compulsion the next time I feel distress because it took it away. It worked. That's my solution. So if you're having any aha moments so far, please consider subscribing to the channel for more content just like this. So now I'll get to my third point, which is going to be kind of my final point for this video. And that's about over control and rules. So OCD is really about rules. What's right to do, what's wrong to do, how many times to do something, when to do something. If I have this thought, I must do this compulsion. And the stakes for breaking the rules feel incredibly high. Again, because remember, the things people are worried about with OCD are again, life or death, people getting hurt. It is stuff that would be just really awful if it did happen. But holding these rules so tightly ultimately narrows your tolerance for uncertainty. And it is intolerance for uncertainty. That's what keeps you stuck in the OCD loop. However your symptoms show up, there's lots of different types of OCD. There's lots of different ways that those obsessions and compulsions can show up. But whatever it is, it all really seems to come down to this extreme intolerance of uncertainty. The obsession injects some doubt, so then you do the compulsion to try to assuage the doubt in some form. So intolerance of uncertainty, that is what keeps you stuck. So your brain never gets a chance to learn two critical things that would actually help you break out of this cycle. The first critical piece of learning is I can handle not knowing. But you have to learn that. You have to have the experience and learn that. Your brain has to learn that you can handle not knowing. And then the other critical piece of learning is, even if I don't do the ritual, the bad thing doesn't happen. So those are really the two critical pieces of learning that have to happen to get off this OCD ride. So I'm going to link a blog post below that's describing exposure and response prevention. It's also called exposure and ritual prevention. That is the primary treatment for OCD. So that treatment really, ultimately, that's kind of what you learn in doing ERP is what we call it for short, that you can handle the uncertainty, that you can handle not knowing, and that even if you don't do whatever the thing is, that either the bad thing doesn't happen, or the other piece of learning is that your distress goes away eventually. Without you having to do anything, the distress burns itself out and goes away on its own. So I'm going to link that blog post down below if you're curious about how exposure and response prevention really gets at this stuff. And then to close, I'll say that my hope with this is that by understanding OCD as a learning loop, it's just kind of learning to understand it in terms of reinforcements and learning, rather than a personal flaw, helps kind of chip away or cut away at the shame that people tend to feel when they have OCD. And if we can get the shame out of the way, then real learning can happen, real healing can happen. And that happens ultimately through learning to live with uncertainty. And so I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. All right, bye.